So the fundamental property of pointer is it will contain the address of other variables, and the normal variables they will contain the normal values. Now once we have this fundamental knowledge, of pointers, we'll be using these pointers for dynamic memory allocation. So two types of memories you can allocate for the variables. One, during the compilation time, that is called as static memory allocation, and another one, dynamic memory allocation during the execution of the program. Dynamic memory allocation during execution of the program. So two ways. So among that, static already we know. So what is static? All these are examples for static memory allocation. That means whenever you declare a variable, some memory will be allocated for those variables. Whenever you declare a variable, some memory will be allocated for those variables. So what is the memory? For a variable, address 1 is given. For p variable, address 500 is given. So this is example for static memory allocation. Allocation during the compilation time itself. So when it comes for dynamic memory allocation, the memory allocation will be done during the execution. That is real time when the program is executing. That is what is dynamic memory allocation. Now we can do that dynamic memory allocation with different dynamic memory allocation functions. The different dynamic memory allocation functions. One second. All right. So there are three different dynamic memory allocation functions in C. There are three dynamic memory allocation functions. Right. So when you look at the syllabus, see here, when you look at the syllabus, the concept is something like this: dynamic memory allocation functions. Then representation of array is already over, like how it will array representation is shown. Dynamically allocated arrays, you concentrate on these two statements: dynamic memory allocation functions and dynamically allocated arrays. These two are being covered parallelly. The concepts are same, so they are being, because here we concentrate specifically on arrays and here we talk about all the data types. So when you look, come back to my notes, see here, dynamically allocated arrays I am covering first. So dynamically allocated arrays, nothing but dynamic memory allocation. If you want to take, array is one type of, you can dynamically allocate memory for arrays, for linked list, stack. One second. Hello. Right, you can allocate memory for different entities. So but specifically they are considering arrays in that case. Arrays in that case. Now one dimensional arrays. So how can we allocate memory dynamically for one dimensional arrays? So basically we study three dynamic memory allocation functions in this. First one is malloc, second one is realloc, and calloc. So three functions we are going to study for dynamic memory allocation. So when we talk about arrays, arrays are of two types. Either they are one dimensional arrays or they are two dimensional arrays. So this is what is an example for one dimensional array. So it is one dimensional array. So when you talk about it two dimensional arrays, that is array of arrays, then it becomes two dimensional array. So what it is a two dimensional array which is containing 4 rows and 4 columns. That is nothing but two dimensional array, nothing but matrix, which is containing rows and columns. These are the columns and these are the rows. We talk about these two in detail. All right. So for one dimensional array, how can we allocate memory? For that we are writing a macro for malloc. So what it tells here is, I'll take it this everything here to the paint section. Right, that part I have taken it here. So what it indicates here is we are defining our new macro. Like how do we define our, in C you must have studied two entities, the fundamental data types and derived data types and user defined data types. So you can compare this with user defined data type. That means hash defined keyword you have studied in C. So how do we use? You write something like hash define, right? A space 10. What it means here is hash define. I want to define my own variable called A. That means I am giving some synonym for that. A will be having some value called 10. That means wherever in the program, if you are writing A, nothing but you are writing 10. That is what is meaning. Acronym, aliasing you are doing. You are giving some name which you can remember properly. So if you don't want to remember some fractional values, say for example pi, the value of pi is what? 3.142. We all know this 3.142. So why do we use hash define? We use hash define for giving that implicit name. So 3.142 pi value, the value of pi is 3.142. Instead of writing 3.142 again and again during the programming, so what you do, you just assign that with the hash define keyword to some variable called pi, and you'll be using that value. So same thing we are doing for macro definition also here. So same thing we are doing while defining the macros. So what we do here is hash define. I am trying to define something new for this what? For this macro name. For this macro name. And what is the definition? This is what is macro name, the second part. And this is what is the third part. I'm going to highlight it. So just now I had shown three things. Hash define keyword was there, A and 10. So hash define keyword as it is, then this you compare it with A, and what should happen whenever you call that macro. So what it means here is macro name is starting with P, N and type. So P is nothing but our pointer, N is size and type is data type. Very simple. So for that we first allocate memory. So this is where the malloc function comes. So what malloc function does here is allocate memory. So for time being, you just keep it, maintain it as it is. Even though you don't understand why you should write it like this, you can give any other names also for this. Now malloc is the actual function where dynamic memory allocation function will, take place. So allocate memory, perform typecasting. That is type star. I want it to be typecasted and then n star size of int. So meaning of this here is malloc function is being called. We want to allocate memory. We want to allocate memory of these many bytes size. You can give it as 5. 5 into what is size of each data type. If it is integer, integer will take 4 bytes. So 5 into 4 is how much? 20. So this is total is 20 bytes. 20 bytes will be allocated to P. So that is what is dynamic memory allocation. That is what is dynamic memory allocation. I'll continue this. I will continue the remaining part in the next class. So I'll stop the class here. Okay, because our time is nearly 1:13. So I'll continue the remaining part in the next class. Okay, thank you. Thanks for joining. You can leave the class now, all of you.